That night, I thought I was living the beginning of my eternity, but it only took 5 minutes for everything I believed about love, about myself, about the future I had painted with perfect colors in my most intimate dreams, to disappear like smoke. 5 minutes. The time it takes to make coffee, the time it takes to change clothes, the time it takes to check your phone, the time it took for my heart to start dying. Before I continue, I need to ask you something. If you've ever been through pain that no one saw, that no one validated, but that broke you inside, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's the story of all of us who believed too much, who erased ourselves trying to be enough, who smiled while bleeding inside. And I want you to know, right now, wherever you are, you're not alone. You never were. It was the most beautiful room I'd ever seen in my life. Light-colored wooden walls, hand-treated by artisans from Gyeongju, each texture carrying the history of generations who had lived, loved, and died in these mountains. White candles flickered gently with the wind coming from the mountains, that cold, perfumed wind that only exists in that sacred region of South Korea, where ancient temples still stand and the past whispers through every breeze. Lotus flower petals, a symbol of purity and rebirth in Buddhist tradition, were scattered across the floor delicately, as if someone had drawn a sacred path to the bed, as if each petal was a prayer for happiness. The room smelled of sandalwood and jasmine, of tradition and new beginnings. The wooden beams above were carved with traditional patterns, symbols of longevity and prosperity. Through the window, I could see the silhouettes of mountains against the darkening sky, their peaks touching the first stars of the evening. Everything felt like a painting, like a scene from those historical dramas my mother used to watch, where love was eternal and promises were never broken. I was still wearing part of the white hanbok I'd worn at the ceremony. The fabric was heavy, embroidered with silver threads that shimmered in the candlelight, like moonlight on water. My mother had chosen that hanbok months before, spending hours in the traditional markets of Seoul, touching fabric after fabric until she found the perfect one. I remember the day she showed it to me, tears streaming down her face, saying I looked like a princess from ancient tales, like the heroines in the stories her grandmother had told her as a child. The jasmine perfume she'd given me as a wedding gift seemed to fill the entire air, mixing with the smell of wood and melted wax and the fresh mountain breeze. It was her mother's perfume, passed down through 3 generations of women in our family. "Wear this on your wedding night," she had whispered to me while fastening the tiny bottle around my neck with a silk cord. "It will bring you luck in love, just as it brought me luck with your father." Everything was perfect, cinematographic, carefully orchestrated, almost unreal in its beauty. He entered the room after the ceremony, still wearing the traditional men's attire, the dark blue durumagi that made his eyes seem even deeper, more mysterious. The fabric rustled softly as he moved, and I could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the incense from the ceremony. He looked at me in a way that made my heart race, that look I'd known since the first time we met, 3 years earlier, at a friend's wedding party in Gangnam. I remember that first meeting so vividly. I had been standing by the window, watching the city lights of Seoul spread out below like fallen stars, when he approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "You look like you're trying to escape," he had said with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. And I had laughed because it was true. I had never been comfortable at big parties, had always preferred quiet corners and meaningful conversations to loud music and small talk. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing, about our dreams, our fears, the books we loved, the places we wanted to see. He quoted poetry, Yoon Dong-ju and Pablo Neruda, and I felt like I had finally found someone who understood the language of my soul. By the end of the night, I knew something had shifted in my universe. I had found him, or so I thought. Now, 3 years later, on our wedding night, he held my face with both hands, his warm fingers against my cold, nervous skin. My heart hammered in my chest, a mixture of anticipation and inexplicable anxiety that I tried to push away. His thumbs traced gentle circles on my cheeks as he looked into my eyes and whispered, "I need to go downstairs for just a moment. My cousin needs help with something. 5 minutes, I promise. Just 5 minutes and I'll be back." His voice was soft, apologetic, that voice I had fallen in love with during countless late-night phone calls and whispered conversations in dark movie theaters, that voice that had read me poetry and told me I was beautiful, even on my worst days. I smiled, even though something in my chest tightened, nodded. Because that's what women in love do. They agree, they accommodate, they wait, they trust. We're taught from childhood that patience is a virtue, that good women don't demand, don't question, don't make waves. Okay, I said softly, my own voice sounding strange to my ears. I'll wait for you. He kissed my forehead gently, his lips warm against my skin, and then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him with a click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. 5 minutes, he had said. Just 5 minutes. That was how long it took for everything to start crumbling, for the foundation of my carefully constructed world to develop its first crack. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silk covers cool beneath my hands. My hands were clasped in my lap, fingers intertwined so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart beat slowly, heavily, full of anticipation and something else I couldn't quite name, a whisper of unease that I tried to ignore. I looked around the room, trying to distract myself. Everything was so beautiful, so meticulously prepared. The candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating patterns that shifted and changed like living things. The lotus petals seemed to glow in the dim light, their white edges tinged with gold, so carefully prepared. His family had organized this wedding night at his grandmother's country house, a place steeped in history, a historic dwelling where generations of couples had begun their lives together, where children had been born and elders had passed peacefully in their sleep. It was an honor to be there, his mother had told me repeatedly during the weeks of wedding preparation. An honor to be accepted into such a traditional family, to be chosen as the wife of her eldest son. Or at least it should have been an honor. At the time I had felt grateful, blessed even. Now, sitting in that perfect room, I felt something closer to dread. The hands of the clock on the wall moved slowly forward, each tick unnaturally loud in the quiet room. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I started fidgeting with my hands, picking at my cuticles, an old anxiety habit I'd had since childhood that my mother had tried unsuccessfully to break. 15 minutes. I got up, my legs stiff from sitting, and adjusted the lotus petals that had been stepped on, trying to restore the perfect pattern. 20 minutes. I sat down again, harder than I meant to, the bed creaking under my weight. The silence in the house was heavy, pressing down on me like a physical weight, almost suffocating in its completeness. Where was he? What could possibly take so long? A nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered questions I didn't want to hear. And then, from upstairs, from the floor above this perfect bridal chamber, I heard laughter. Not one laugh, several. Quick, breathless, muffled, that kind of nervous laughter you try to hide when you're doing something you shouldn't, when you're sharing a secret that would shock others if they knew. Laughter of complicity, of conspiracy, of secrecy. The kind of laughter that makes your stomach drop even before your mind understands why. At first, I tried to rationalize, to find innocent explanations. It must be his cousins still celebrating upstairs. Must be someone drunk making jokes. Must be the groomsmen telling inappropriate stories. It must be anything other than what my intuition is screaming at me right now. But a woman's intuition is like a silent alarm that goes off when something is fundamentally wrong, when danger lurks even if we can't see it yet. It's something primal, something that lives in our bones, passed down from generation to generation of women who learned to sense danger in order to survive. And I knew. Deep down, in a place beyond logic and reason, I knew something was terribly wrong. When I heard his voice mixed with the laughter, something inside me froze solid, turned to ice. It wasn't just the sound, it was the tone. That intimate, relaxed, playful, complicit tone. The same tone he used with me when we were alone, when we were in our private world. But now, he was using it with other people, upstairs, on our wedding night. While I sat alone in our bridal chamber waiting, the laughter came again, louder this time, and I could hear the clink of glasses, the sound of celebration. A woman's voice said something I couldn't quite make out, and he laughed in response, that deep, genuine laugh that I had thought was reserved only for me. My name is Jiwon, and that night, on the day I believed most in love, on the day I wore white and promised eternity before ancestors and God, before 200 witnesses who had traveled from all over Korea to celebrate our union, I learned what it feels like to have the ground disappear beneath your feet, to have everything you thought was solid and real suddenly reveal itself as illusion. Have you ever felt that? That moment when your body knows something your mind is still desperately denying? That moment when your hands start shaking and your breath comes short, even though you haven't consciously processed what's wrong yet? Tell me in the comments, please. because I want to know if you understand me. I want to know I'm not alone in this particular kind of pain. I stood up slowly, my legs weak and trembling, as if sudden movement might confirm what I was beginning to fear, might make the nightmare real. I walked to the bedroom door, each step feeling like I was wading through deep water. My hand reached for the doorknob, and I noticed absently that my fingers were shaking. Opened it. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by a faint light coming from the stairs leading to the second floor. My hands were trembling so badly I had to press them against my stomach to still them. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears, like a war drum, like thunder, like the sound of my world ending. I started climbing the stairs, one hand on the wall to steady myself. Each step was a denial, a desperate attempt to rewrite reality before it became fixed and unchangeable. This can't be what I'm thinking, I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible. It's something innocent. There's an explanation. Another step. The wood creaked under my foot, and I froze, terrified that they might hear me coming. He wouldn't do this. Not today. Not to me. Not on our wedding night. Not after everything we've been through. All the promises we made just hours ago. One more step. The laughter came again, and my stomach twisted into knots. I must be going crazy. This is just paranoia, just pre-wedding anxiety manifesting late. I'm overreacting. I'm being that jealous, suspicious woman I always swore I'd never become. But my feet kept climbing, because the body knows when the soul needs answers, even when the heart is terrified of what those answers might be. The door to the room at the end of the hallway was ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling into the dark corridor. Inside, the sound of glasses clinking in celebration, the murmur of low voices speaking in intimate tones, more muffled laughter. I stopped in front of the door, my whole body rigid with fear and dread. My hand was on the doorknob, cold metal against my sweaty palm. My heart was in my throat, choking me. I could hear them now, more clearly. His voice, a woman's voice, others talking and laughing. The woman said something, and he responded with a warmth in his voice that made my blood run cold. And that's when I realized there's a type of fear that has no name. It's not the fear of physical danger, not the fear of death or injury. It's deeper than that, more existential. It's the fear of confirming what, if true, will change everything forever, will shatter the person you thought you were, and the life you thought you had. It's the fear of opening a door you can never close again, of seeing something you can never unsee. It's the fear that, after that second, after you push this door open and see what's on the other side, you'll never be the same person again. That the innocent, trusting Jiwon who walked up these stairs will die in this hallway, and someone harder, more damaged, will take her place. My hand hovered over the door handle. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to go back downstairs, to preserve my ignorance and my illusions. Because once you know something, you can never unknow it. Once you see the truth, you can't go back to the comfortable lies. But I pushed the door open anyway, because sometimes, even when we know it will destroy us, we need to see the truth. And I saw. He was there. My husband. The man who just 3 hours earlier had sworn fidelity before 200 people, before our families and friends and God. The man who had held my hand at the altar and said, "Till death do us part," with tears in his eyes, with another woman. They were sitting close together on a love seat, too close. His arm was draped casually over the back of the seat, his fingers playing with a strand of her hair. She was leaning into him, her hand resting on his thigh with a familiarity that spoke of repeated touches, of intimacy that had been built over time. Laughing, holding her hand in his, that hand that had held mine just hours ago, that had slipped a ring onto my finger while promising eternal love. Her dress was red, a deep, seductive, brilliant red, the color of passion and danger, nothing traditional, nothing appropriate for a wedding. It was tight, modern, sexy, everything my traditional white hanbok was not. Her lips, painted the same shade of crimson, were curved in a smile I'll never forget, a victorious smile, a possessive smile, as if she had won something that was mine, as if she was claiming territory. There were other people in the room, his friends, people I recognized from the wedding, his cousins who had toasted our happiness just hours ago, all holding wine glasses, their faces flushed with alcohol, laughing as if this were an inside joke, a delicious secret only they knew, as if my humiliation was entertainment, and when my eyes met his, time stopped. Everything stopped. The laughter died. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me standing in the doorway, The betrayed bride in her white handbuck. The fool who had believed in love. The expression on his face wasn't guilt. It was fear, but not the fear of losing me. Not remorse for betraying the woman he supposedly loved. It was the fear of being discovered, of being caught. The fear that the disguise had fallen, that the mask had slipped. The fear that the game was over and there would be consequences. For 1 second, just one eternal second, I saw the naked truth in his eyes. A truth that had probably always been there, but I had been too blind, too trusting, too in love to see. He had never loved me. Never. Not on that first night when he quoted poetry. Not during our courtship when he brought me flowers every week. Not when he proposed on a beach at sunset with a ring that cost more than my father made in a year. Not at the altar when he cried what I thought were tears of joy. Never. I thought I knew what love was, until I saw what it was capable of doing to me. Someone in the room murmured something uncomfortable. The spell broke. The woman in red quickly, guiltily, let go of his hand. But too late. Far too late. I had already seen. My brain had already registered the image, burning it into my memory where it would replay endlessly for months to come. My heart had already understood what my mind was still trying to deny. He stood up abruptly, the wine glass in his hand nearly spilling, his mouth open to say something, words forming and dying on his lips. What would he say? What could he possibly say? It's not what you think? I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. What explanation exists for destroying someone on the most important day of her life? What words could possibly make this okay? I said nothing. Couldn't speak even if I wanted to. My throat was closed. My tongue was lead. I just looked at him with eyes that saw him clearly for the first time. Looked at her red dress and victorious smile. Looked at every person in that room who knew what was happening, who had probably always known, and chose to participate in the humiliation, chose his side over basic human decency. These people had eaten at our wedding feast, had toasted our happiness, had smiled and bowed and offered congratulations, and all the while, they had known. They had all known. And then, because I couldn't bear to look at them for another second, because I felt my carefully maintained composure about to shatter into screaming or crying or both, I turned my back, turned away from my husband, from my marriage, from the future I had imagined. I don't remember how I went down the stairs. My body must have known the way, must have activated some kind of survival autopilot, because the next thing I knew I was outside. I only remember that my legs moved on their own, one foot in front of the other, mechanical and numb. I only remember the cold of the early morning cutting my face when I opened the front door and stepped into the night, the shock of cold air hitting my lungs. I only remember the sound of crickets in the garden, singing their eternal song as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't just collapsed, as if the universe hadn't just revealed itself as cruel and indifferent to my pain. I walked through the garden, my white hanbok dragging through the grass, collecting dew and dirt. My bare feet were cold on the stone path. Above me, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, uncaring. The moon watched impassively. I walked to the lake behind the house, that picturesque lake where we had taken engagement photos just 3 months ago, where he had kissed me and promised me forever, while the photographer captured what we thought was the beginning of our love story. The water was black under the moon, reflecting the stars in an almost cruel way, because how could the universe be so beautiful in such a horrible moment? How could nature be so serene when I was being torn apart from the inside? I stood at the edge of the water, the mud cold and soft under my feet. I looked down at my left hand, at the diamond ring that caught the moonlight and threw it back in sharp, brilliant flashes. I took the diamond ring off my finger slowly, deliberately. It had cost a fortune. His family had insisted on choosing it, had taken me to the most expensive jeweler in Seoul. They had insisted on the biggest diamond, the most expensive setting, the most eye-catching design. To show how much he loves you, his mother had said, squeezing my hand. To show everyone that our family values you. Love, what a lying word. What a meaningless, empty, deceiving word. I held the ring up to the moonlight one last time, watched it sparkle coldly. All that money, all that metal and stone, none of it meaning anything, none of it protecting me from this pain. I threw the ring into the lake as hard as I could. I heard the small sound of something sinking in the water, disappearing into the black depths forever, and thought with a strange, detached clarity, this is how I feel, sinking, disappearing, drowning. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Just standing in the cold, shaking, from cold or shock or grief, I couldn't tell, staring at the water where my ring had disappeared, watching the ripples spread and fade until the surface was smooth again, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just thrown away my marriage, trying to understand where I had lost myself. At what moment did I stop seeing clearly? At what moment did I convince myself that being loved by him was more important than loving myself? At what moment did I become so small, so diminished, that I accepted crumbs and called it a feast? In Korea, they say marriage is the beginning of adult life, the moment when you truly become a full member of society. Pramim, it was the end of innocence, the death of the naive girl who believed in happily ever after. Little did I know that would be the first of many nights when I would question my own worth, when I would lie awake wondering what was wrong with me that made me unlovable. But that realization would come later. Right now, standing by the lake, I was still numb, still in shock. The real pain hadn't hit yet. I turned away from the water, finally, my feet and the hem of my handbox soaked and muddy. I walked back to the house slowly, moving like a ghost through the garden. The building loomed before me, lights glowing warmly in the windows, looking like the picture of happiness and celebration. No one looking at it from outside would guess at the misery contained within its walls. I returned to our bridal chamber slowly, my bare feet leaving wet prints on the wooden floors of the hallway. My feet were numb with cold, stepping on the lotus petals that now seemed like withered petals of a dead promise, like mockery. The beautiful room that had seemed so perfect just an hour ago now felt like a stage set, like a beautiful lie. I sat on the floor, not on the bed. I couldn't bear to sit on the bed that was supposed to be ours. I sat on the hard floor and leaned against the wall, pulling my knees up to my chest, hugging them tightly, making myself as small as possible. The moon came through the window and drew long shadows on the carpet, shadows that looked like reaching hands, like grasping claws. The candles had already gone out. Someone must have blown them out, or maybe they had simply burned down to nothing. The thin smoke rose in spirals from the wicks, carrying with it the smell of something that had been beautiful and was now just ash, just the ghost of light. Everything seemed like an empty set after a cruel show, after the audience has gone home and the actors have removed their costumes and only the bare truth remains. When someone you love destroys you, it's not the scream that hurts, it's the silence. And the silence of that night was deafening, absolute, suffocating. I didn't cry, not immediately, couldn't cry. The shock was so great that the tears seemed trapped somewhere deep inside me, frozen, as if my body had decided that crying would be admitting this was real, would be accepting what had happened. As long as I didn't cry, maybe I could pretend this was a nightmare, something I would wake up from. I spent the entire night awake, sitting on that cold floor, watching the moon move slowly across the sky, watching the shadows shift and change. His face kept coming back in flashes behind my closed eyelids. Her smile, the way they sat together, the look in his eyes when he saw me, the sound of their laughter. Everything repeated in my mind like a film stuck in a loop, playing the same terrible scenes over and over and over, torturing me with every detail, every nuance I had missed in the first shocking moment. I replayed every moment of our relationship, looking for clues I had missed. Had there been signs? Warning flags I had ignored? Moments when he seemed distant or distracted that I had rationalized away? How long had this been going on? Had he been seeing her the whole time we were dating? Had he been with her on the nights he said he was working late? Had she been there, in his bed, in the spaces that should have been mine? I tried to convince myself that I could forgive, that it was possible, that love was stronger than betrayal, that everyone makes mistakes and deserves second chances, that maybe if I were better, more beautiful, more interesting, more exciting, more everything, he wouldn't have needed to seek out someone else, that maybe this was somehow my fault, some failing in me that had driven him to her arms. It's amazing how, even when we're the victims, when we're the ones bleeding, we manage to find ways to blame ourselves. How we twist the narrative until somehow we're the ones at fault for someone else's cruelty. But how do you love someone who laughs while breaking you? How do you trust someone who promised you eternity and delivered betrayal on the same day, in the same building, while you waited alone for him? How do you look into someone's eyes and not see the monster they've become? When the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, beautiful, indifferent, eternal, He came back. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, hesitant, slow, heard him pause outside the door, waiting, gathering courage maybe. He opened the bedroom door slowly, carefully, as if testing the ground, as if I might explode at any moment. I was still sitting on the floor, the hanbok wrinkled and stained and ruined, just like everything else. My hair was messy, falling out of the elaborate updo my mother had spent hours creating. My eyes were fixed on the wall, dry but burning, seeing nothing. He stopped at the entrance, one hand still on the doorknob, waited for me to acknowledge him. When he realized I wasn't going to say anything, wasn't going to make this easy for him, he came in slowly and closed the door behind him with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud. G1. His voice came out low, hesitant, almost a whisper, testing the waters. I didn't respond, didn't move, didn't even look at him. Just kept staring at the wall, as if it was the most fascinating thing in the world. I can explain. The words hung in the air, pathetic and inadequate. Silence. The only sound was our breathing and the chirping of birds outside, greeting the new day as if it was a day like any other. It was nothing. We were just playing around, just joking. You misunderstood what you saw. Misunderstood. As if my eyes had lied to me. As if his hand in hers, his arm around her, the intimacy between them had been an illusion, a trick of the light. As if the intimacy I saw, that spoke of familiarity and repeated contact, had been my imagination, my paranoia, my jealousy inventing problems where there were none. G1, please. Look at me. Let me explain. I slowly raised my eyes from the wall and stared at him, really looked at him for the first time since entering that room upstairs. And in that moment, with the harsh morning light illuminating every detail, I saw who he really was. Not the charming man who had won me over with poetry and promises. Not the attentive fiancé who brought me flowers every week and remembered every little thing I said. Not the groom who had cried at our wedding, who I thought was overwhelmed with love and happiness. But the man who could look me in the eyes and lie without blinking. The man who could betray me on our wedding night and then tell me I had misunderstood. The man who valued his pride and his pleasure more than my heart. A stranger. I was married to a stranger. Get out of here. My voice came out calm, flat, emotionless, cold, dead. I barely recognized it as my own. G1, please, we need to talk about this. Get out. He hesitated, mouth opening as if about to argue, to plead his case, to try to convince me that somehow this wasn't as bad as it seemed. But something in my look, something in my eyes, must have told him there was no going back, that whatever we had was dead and buried, that the woman who had loved him had died in this room and someone else had taken her place. He left finally, closing the door slowly, softly, and I was alone again. But this time, the silence was different. It was no longer the silence of shock, of disbelief, of denial. It was the silence of decision, of ending, of death and rebirth. The next day, he acted as if nothing had happened, as if the previous night had been a bad dream that we had both woken up from, as if we could simply move forward and pretend, as if our marriage hadn't been destroyed before it had really begun. He made coffee in the small kitchen, the smell wafting up to the bedroom where I lay staring at the ceiling, placed the cup on the nightstand beside me with a shy smile, almost embarrassed, like a schoolboy who had been caught in some minor mischief, but not truly sorry, not truly remorseful, just sorry he had been caught. Asked if I had slept well, his voice artificially bright, as if it were just another day, as if the previous night had been just a minor disagreement that sleep would fix, as if trauma could be erased by dawn, as if betrayal could be forgotten with daylight. Called me my love while spreading butter on bread, the endearment sounding obscene in the morning light, a profanation of language itself, and I pretended, because I didn't know what else to do, because the weight of tradition and family and social expectation pressed down on me like a physical force, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to act. Pretended I didn't see what I saw, pretended I didn't hear what I heard, pretended I wasn't bleeding inside, wasn't dying slowly with every breath. I pretended because at that moment, I still didn't know how to do otherwise, didn't know that I had the right to do otherwise. Because in Korea, especially in traditional families like his, marriage isn't just between two people. It's between two families, two bloodlines, two futures intertwined. And breaking that, ending a marriage, especially so soon, especially after such an elaborate wedding, means shame, means judgment, means being the subject of pitying looks and malicious whispers behind your back for years to come. Did you hear about the Kim family's daughter-in-law? Left him after just one night. Can you imagine? What could have happened? She must be unstable. She must have mental problems. She must have been ungrateful, demanding, impossible to please. So I smiled because that's what I had been taught to do. Drank the coffee even though it tasted like ashes in my mouth, said thank you in a voice that sounded hollow even to my own ears, and died a little more with each passing moment. Sometimes, love isn't a feeling. It's a broken mirror where we insist on seeing ourselves whole, where we refuse to acknowledge the cracks and the missing pieces and the distorted reflection staring back at us. For weeks, I continued living in that house, trapped in that beautiful prison surrounded by the mountains of Gyeongju. From the outside, everything seemed perfect, like a postcard of marital bliss. The house was beautiful, traditionally elegant, with gardens that bloomed in spring with cherry blossoms and azaleas. The surrounding mountains were calm, eternal, peaceful, as if they held 1,000 years of secrets and had seen countless human dramas play out beneath their unchanging peaks. But inside those beautiful walls, I lived imprisoned in a silence that weighed more than any scream, heavier than chains, more suffocating than any prison. He went out every night without fail, always with a new excuse, always delivered with that charming smile that had once made my heart flutter, always with a promise to return soon, to not be long. I need to handle some family matters. You know how my uncle is, always needing help with something. My cousin needs help with a business thing. Some documents to review. Won't take long. I'm going to meet some friends real quick, just for a drink. I'll be home before you know it. And I smiled, nodded, said, okay, drive safely. Prepared dinner that he rarely came home to eat. Food that would sit on the table growing cold while I waited. Waited like a faithful dog, like a dutiful wife, like an idiot. I became an actress in the theater of my own life, playing the role of happy wife, satisfied bride, content woman, performing for his family when they visited, performing for the neighbors we passed on the street, performing for myself in the mirror, wearing the mask so constantly that I sometimes forgot it was a mask, sometimes forgot that underneath was a woman screaming silently for help while my soul slowly died. Every night, I lay alone in that huge bed, the bed that was supposed to be ours, staring at the ceiling and counting the wooden beams, trying to tire my mind enough to sleep, wondering, how much longer can I keep pretending? How much longer can I survive this? The answer, I would eventually learn, was, not much longer. Until one rainy April afternoon, while tidying his room, because good wives tidy their husbands' rooms, don't they? Because making ourselves useful, making ourselves indispensable through service and submission, is how we were taught to keep our husbands. I found a letter. I had been putting away his laundry, folding his shirts with the care I had been taught, when I noticed a book on his nightstand that hadn't been there before, hidden inside a poetry book, tucked between the pages like a pressed flower, like a secret meant to be kept forever. A book he said he loved, that he carried everywhere, that he quoted from in conversations to seem deep and cultured and romantic. Poetry speaks to the soul, he used to say, looking meaningful. The book's cover was dark blue, worn by time and handling, the gilded letters nearly faded. Spring Poems, by Yoon Dong-ju, one of Korea's most beloved poets, a man who had died young in a Japanese prison during the occupation, a man who wrote about resistance and hope and the beauty of his homeland, a tragic romantic figure. He always said that book connected him to the Korean soul, that it helped him understand his place in our culture's long history, that the words there were sacred, were truth. But when I opened the book, curious about what passage he had marked, it wasn't Yoon Dong-ju's beautiful words I found. It was a letter, carefully folded, handwritten on expensive cream-colored paper, with that handwriting I knew so well, that handwriting I had seen on love notes he had written me during our courtship, on the birthday cards he had given me. The handwriting was his, unmistakably. But the name at the beginning, written in an intimate hand with a small heart dotting the I, wasn't mine. To Heejin. My heart stopped. Time stopped. The rain against the window stopped. Everything in the universe froze for one infinite moment. My hands began to tremble so violently I nearly dropped the letter, but I couldn't let go of the paper even though every instinct screamed at me to put it back, to close the book, to preserve my ignorance. It was as if my fingers had glued themselves to that letter, as if some force beyond my control was compelling me to read. forcing me to face the truth I had been trying so hard to avoid, to deny, to explain away. The lines were short, but each word hurt more than an open wound, more than any physical pain I had ever experienced. My darling Hyejin, when I see you, I forget that I'm married. You are my refuge, my addiction, my punishment. You are the one I think about when I close my eyes. Each day beside Jiwon is a day away from you, and it kills me. It's killing me slowly. She is duty. You are desire. She is obligation. You are choice. I had to stop reading, had to close my eyes and breathe, because suddenly there wasn't enough air in the room, in the house, in the entire world. My breathing was out of control, coming in short gasps that didn't seem to bring any oxygen to my lungs. The room was spinning, tilting, the floor becoming unstable beneath my feet. But I forced my eyes to open, forced myself to continue, because I needed to know the whole truth, no matter how much it destroyed me. The letter ended with a promise. When all this is over, when enough time has passed that we can end this farce without causing too much scandal, I'll be with you. I swear it. She'll never know the truth. She's too naive, too trusting to ever suspect. And even if she does find out, even if she knows everything, it doesn't matter. You're the one I choose. You're the one I've always chosen. You always have been. From the first moment I saw you. Wait for me, my love. It won't be long now. Forever yours, Minho. When all this is over. When this is over. When I am over. In other words, when he had successfully disposed of me. When he had used me for whatever purpose I served, and could finally discard me. I was the this. I was the obstacle, the inconvenience, the thing standing between him and his happiness. I was the problem that needed to be solved, the temporary situation that had to be endured until it could be ended. That's when I understood with absolute crystalline clarity. He didn't love me. He never loved me. Not for one single moment of our entire relationship. I was just the perfect disguise, the ideal cover, the arranged marriage that pleased traditional families, that satisfied social obligations, that looked good in photos. The social role he needed to fulfill, to keep up appearances, to access family money, to maintain his reputation. The decorative wife he could show off at events and family gatherings while his heart, his real life, his true self was with someone else. His love had another name, a name written with hearts and kept hidden in poetry books. And that name was never mine, would never be mine, could never be mine. In that instant, everything I was collapsed. Have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized the face staring back at you? Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own skin? Like the person you thought you were never actually existed? If you have, tell me in the comments. Please. Because that day, when I finally put down that letter with shaking hands and walked like a ghost to the bedroom mirror, when I looked at my reflection with eyes that could finally see clearly, I only saw emptiness. My eyes were dull, lifeless, the eyes of a dead woman still walking. My skin was pale, stretched tight over bones that seemed more prominent than they had been. My body was there, solid and real, but my soul had been emptied, word by word, line by line, by the letter of a man who had promised to love me until death. Funny how that promise came true, just not the way I expected. He did love me until death, until my death, the death of who I was, the death of my innocence, my trust, my belief in love. I sat on the floor right there, still holding the poetry book that had held such betrayal between its beautiful pages. And finally, I cried. Really cried. Not the silent tears of shock and denial, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal and broken deep inside me. Sobs that shook my whole body, that made my chest ache and my throat raw. The kind of crying that feels like it might never stop, like you might drown in your own grief. I cried for everything I had believed in. For every moment I had treasured that turned out to be a lie. For all the times I had doubted myself, questioned my own perceptions, suppressed my own instincts when I should have doubted him. For all the nights I spent awake blaming myself, diminishing myself, twisting myself into smaller and smaller shapes, molding myself desperately to be the woman he wanted, without realizing that he never wanted me at all, that there was nothing I could have done, no way I could have been, that would have made him love me. I cried for the Jiwon who had entered that house on her wedding night full of hope and dreams and love, for the girl who had believed in fairy tales and happily ever after, and the power of true love, for the woman who had lost herself so completely trying to be loved that she forgot she was worthy of love, just as she was, for all the versions of myself I had killed, trying to become what he needed. And there, on the cold floor of that room, with rain beating against the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance, something inside me broke, but not the way you imagine. Not the way I had been breaking for weeks, piece by piece, slowly fragmenting under the weight of betrayal and neglect and lies. This was different. It wasn't a destructive break. Not really. It was a necessary break, a transformative break. Like when a seed needs to crack open to sprout, needs to destroy its protective shell to reach toward the sun. Like when a butterfly needs to break through the cocoon to fly, must struggle and fight and tear its way free to transform. Because sometimes we need to completely shatter, need to break into 1,000 pieces to understand which pieces really matter, which parts of ourselves are essential, and which are just expectations and conditioning and masks we've worn for so long, we forgot they weren't our real faces. And in that moment of complete destruction, of total breakdown, I felt something else begin. Something small, something quiet, something that felt almost like strength. It took me months to leave that house. Not weeks, months. Because leaving wasn't simple. Leaving meant acknowledging defeat, meant admitting failure, meant facing shame. And in Korea, especially for women, especially in traditional families like mine, divorce still carries silence and shame like a heavy weight, like a mark of disgrace. The stigma is real and tangible and crushing. People don't ask, "What did he do?" when a woman leaves her husband. They ask, "What did you do to make him stray?" As if a woman's pain is always, somehow, her fault. As if we have the power to make men behave well or badly based on our own worthiness. As if betrayal is earned, rather than chosen. My mother begged me to stay when I finally told her what had happened, what I had seen, what I had found. Came to the house and took my hands in hers and pleaded with tears streaming down her face. Said that every marriage has problems, that I was being dramatic, that I needed to be more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, more accommodating, more everything, that men make mistakes and women endure, that this is just how marriage is. "You think your father was perfect?" she said, her voice shaking. "You think I didn't have my own difficulties? But I stayed. I made it work. That's what women do. We endure. We sacrifice. We make our marriages work no matter what." My father wouldn't even look me in the eyes when I tried to talk to him, as if I had brought shame to the family just by even considering leaving, as if my pain was somehow embarrassing, somehow shameful. His disappointment was palpable, heavy, suffocating. "You made vows before God and our ancestors," he said finally, his voice hard, his eyes distant and cold. "Vows are sacred. They are not broken because of temporary difficulties." "Temporary?" I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. And he broke every one of those vows, every single one, on our wedding night. But they didn't want to hear it, didn't want to know the details, didn't want to acknowledge the truth that their perfect son-in-law, their carefully chosen match, was a liar and a cheat, because the truth is inconvenient. The truth is messy and complicated, and doesn't fit into the neat social structures they had built their lives around. The truth messes up the order of things, disrupts the status quo, exposes wounds that everyone prefers to keep hidden under polite conversation and social niceties. But I had learned something crucial sitting on that floor with the letter in my hands. The greater shame isn't ending a marriage. The greater shame is staying where your soul no longer fits, where you have to cut off parts of yourself just to squeeze into the space allotted to you. It's pretending everything's okay when you're dying inside, slowly poisoning yourself with silence and endurance. It's smiling in family photos when your heart is in pieces, when you're screaming internally, while your face shows nothing but pleasant contentment. It's lying next to someone every night and feeling completely, utterly, devastatingly alone in the darkness. That is the real shame. That is the real failure. Not leaving, staying. So on a rainy July dawn, when the whole house was still sleeping, when even the servants hadn't risen yet, I packed my bags. I didn't take much, didn't want much. Some clothes, not the expensive dresses he had bought me, not the designer items his family had given me, but my own things, the comfortable clothes I had owned before the wedding, some books that had been mine, that I had loved before I knew him, the necklace my grandmother had given me before she passed away, her hands shaking as she clasped it around my neck and told me to be strong, to never forget who I was. "Remember," she had whispered, You came from a line of strong women. Don't let anyone make you forget that. I left behind everything he had given me, all the expensive jewelry that had been more about display than affection, the designer dresses he liked me to wear to show me off, the gifts that were more about his image than my happiness. None of it was mine anyway. It was all props in the play we had been performing. I left a short note on the kitchen table, my handwriting surprisingly steady. I deserve more than crumbs of love, more than lies and betrayal and being someone's second choice. And you deserve to live your truth without me standing in your way. Goodbye. G1. I closed the door of that house softly, carefully, for the last time, stood on the doorstep for just a moment, taking one last look at the mountains, at the garden where I had thrown away my ring, at the building that had been both palace and prison, and then I turned my back on it all, and didn't look back, not once. I took the first train to Seoul, the 5:23 a.m. train, the early commuter train that cuts through the mountain fog and takes you to the big city where millions of people live their anonymous lives, where no one knows your name, or your story, or your pain, where you can disappear into the crowds and start over, become someone new. I sat by the window in the nearly empty car, my small suitcase on the seat beside me like a companion. Rain beat against the glass in heavy drops, creating patterns that formed and dissolved like water paintings, like liquid memories. And as the train accelerated, the powerful engine pulling us forward, leaving Gyeongju behind, I cried silently one last time. But quietly now, privately, watching the lights of houses pass by the window like lives I would never live, futures I would never have with him, the person I would never become as his wife. But for the first time since that terrible wedding night, these weren't tears of despair or shock or confusion. They were tears of liberation, tears of relief, tears of ending and beginning happening at the same time. Sometimes, life breaks us, just to test if we're still capable of getting up, just to see if we're strong enough to rebuild. I arrived in Seoul without plans, without much money, with nothing but an old suitcase, a broken heart, and a determination to survive. A college friend, Min Seo, the only person I had the courage to call from the train station, took me in without hesitation. I had called her crying, barely coherent, and she had simply said, "Come, I'll be waiting." She lived in a tiny apartment in Mapo, one of those places that barely fits a bed and a closet, where you can touch opposite walls if you stretch out your arms. But she shared it with me without a second thought, moved her things to make room, never once made me feel like a burden. In the first days, I slept on the floor beside her bed, on a thin mattress she improvised with folded blankets and spare pillows. The smell of instant coffee brewing each morning and cheap ramen that she made every night were my only companions besides her steady presence. The apartment was small and cramped. The walls were thin enough that I could hear everything. The neighbors arguing next door, children crying somewhere above us, life happening loudly and messily all around us in this packed building. But for the first time in months, the silence inside me didn't hurt, because it wasn't the silence of secrets and lies. It was the silence of truth, of starting over. It was freedom. Min Seo never asked intrusive questions, never demanded explanations or details I wasn't ready to give, never judged or told me what I should have done differently. She just put a plate of food in front of me every night. Simple food, rice and kimchi, and whatever cheap ingredients she could afford, and said, "Eat. You need strength. You need to take care of yourself now." And little by little, bite by bite, day by day, I began to feel hungry again, not just for food, but for life itself, for experience and possibility and the future. I started walking through the streets of Seoul, exploring the city that was now my home. At first, I walked aimlessly, without any destination in mind, just letting my feet take me wherever they wanted to go, just moving, just existing in public space, just being. I passed cafeterias full of young people laughing over iced coffees, clothing stores with mannequins dressed in vibrant colors I never would have worn before, parks where couples holding hands took selfies and families spread picnic blankets under the trees. And at first, yes, it hurt. It hurt deeply to see what I had thought I would have and lost. It hurt to imagine that other people had the love and happiness and partnership I had been denied. It hurt to exist in a world that kept turning, kept being beautiful and full of life, while mine had stopped, had been paused and frozen and broken. But over time, slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, the pain transformed into something different. into curiosity about what else might be possible, into a sense of possibility opening up before me, into a quiet whisper inside me that grew stronger each day, saying, "What if you could start over? What if you could be anyone? What if this pain was actually the end of something bad and the beginning of something that's actually yours?" I started writing again, something I hadn't done since college. Not about him. I refused to give him any more of my time, my energy, my words, but about me, about what it's like to rebuild yourself from the ashes, from the ground up, about how the heart, even when shattered into what seems like a million pieces, somehow keeps beating, stubborn, insistent, determined to live. I bought a cheap notebook at a street stationery store, the kind with a simple cover and thin paper, nothing fancy, and I began filling the pages with words, letting them pour out unfiltered and raw. At first they were just vents, pure anger and pain and confusion and hurt. Pages and pages of "how could he?" and "why wasn't I enough?" and "what's wrong with me?" But gradually, slowly, the words began to change. They began to evolve. They became questions instead of accusations. Who am I without him? Without being his wife, his partner, his anything? What do I actually want from life? What are my own dreams? If I could start from absolute zero, with no expectations or obligations, what kind of woman would I choose to be? And for the first time in my entire life, I realized with a shock that I didn't know the answers. Because I had spent so much time being what he wanted, what my family expected, what society demanded, what everyone else needed me to be, that I had never stopped to ask, "Jiwon, what do you want? What makes you happy? What matters to you?" So I started experimenting, trying new things, testing who I might be. I cut my hair first, a dramatic change that felt like a declaration. That long hair that flowed down my back, that hair he had loved running his fingers through, that hair I had kept growing because he said it made me look more feminine, more traditional, more beautiful. I walked into a salon in Hongdae and told the stylist, "Cut it all off. I want something completely different, something short and easy and nothing like before." I got a short, modern pixie cut that made my face look different, more angular, stronger somehow, more defined, more me. When I looked in the salon mirror, the woman staring back at me was a stranger, but a stranger I wanted to know, a stranger who looked fierce and independent, and free. I started buying clothes that I actually liked, not the soft, modest, traditional colors he approved of, not the feminine dresses his mother praised, but strong colors, reds and deep purples and electric blues, bold prints and patterns, things that made me feel alive and present and visible when I wore them. Each new piece of clothing was an act of rebellion, of self-definition. I started going to cafes alone, something I had never done before. In Korea, women alone in cafes still sometimes draw attention, still get looks, but I went anyway. I took my notebook, ordered an Americano, and wrote. And gradually, day by day, I stopped caring about the looks or what people might be thinking. Their opinions didn't matter. Only mine did. I learned to walk alone through the streets of Seoul without fear, without constant awareness of being watched or judged, without hurry or schedule, without any destination, just walking for the pleasure of movement, of seeing the city, of being alive in my body. I learned to smile when I saw couples holding hands without feeling anger or envy or that sharp pain of longing. Just a soft acceptance that romance wasn't my path right now, and that was okay, that I was okay being alone. I learned to buy flowers for myself, yellow tulips, which had always been my favorites, but which I never bought because they seemed indulgent, seemed like something someone else should give you. I placed them in a cheap vase in Minseo's tiny kitchen, where they brightened the small space and made me smile every time I saw them. They lasted about a week, and then wilted and died, but I bought more, and more after that. Because I deserved flowers, deserved beauty in my life. Even if, especially if, they were just from me. I learned to cook for one person, to make small portions just right for myself, to savor each bite without rushing, without trying to fill silence with conversation, to realize that eating alone wasn't loneliness. It was keeping myself company. It was an act of self-care and self-love, and slowly, painfully, with many setbacks and bad days, I learned to look in the mirror and say, "You're still here. You survived. And that's enough. You're enough." Over time, I got a job at a small publishing house in Gangnam, working as an editorial assistant. It didn't pay much, barely enough to afford my own place, but it was mine. My work, my accomplishment, my money, my independence. No one could take it away from me or use it to control me. Eventually, I saved enough to rent my own place, a tiny studio apartment in Sinchon, barely bigger than Minseo's, but mine alone. Just a single room with a kitchenette in one corner and a bathroom so small you had to be careful not to hit your elbows. But it was my space, where no one could hurt me, where I could close the door and be completely myself. I filled that tiny studio with things I loved, things that expressed who I was becoming. Books stacked on the floor beside the bed because I couldn't afford a bookshelf yet. Books on poetry and philosophy and women's stories. Plants crowding the windowsill, reaching toward the light. Succulents and pothos and a small jade plant that Minseo had given me as a housewarming gift. A colorful rug I found at a flea market in Dongdaemun, bright and cheerful, and completely impractical. Each object was a declaration. I exist. I have my own taste, my own preferences, my own style. I am someone. I am Jiwon, and I matter. And on an autumn night, when the ginkgo leaves were falling through the streets of Seoul like golden snow, painting everything in shades of amber and honey, I realized something that made me stop in the middle of the sidewalk, made passing pedestrians have to walk around me. I was happy, not in an explosive, overwhelming, romantic comedy way, not like in the movies where the protagonist gets over her ex and immediately finds new love and everything is perfect, but in a quiet, deep, true way that resonated in my bones. I was happy alone, happy with myself, happy in my own company. It was a revelation, a miracle, something I never thought possible. One day, I crossed the bridge over the Han River, that iconic bridge where so many people come to contemplate life, to think about their choices, to decide their futures. The wind blew strong off the water, messing up my short hair, bringing the smell of the river, that distinctive smell of water and city and life that's unique to Seoul. And I realized something profound. The wind didn't cut me anymore. It didn't hurt. Didn't make me think of that cold night by the lake in Gyeongju. Didn't trigger panic or pain or memories. It was just wind, natural and neutral and free. And the pain, that pain that had seemed eternal to me, that pain I thought would define me forever, that I believed would be my constant companion for the rest of my life, had transformed into calm, into peace, into acceptance. I lost his love, but I gained something no one else could ever take away from me, myself. If this story seems even a little bit like yours, write it down below in the comments. Sometimes, sharing pain is the first step toward healing, toward realizing you're not alone. And if you've already fallen but got back up, if you've been broken and rebuilt yourself, comment, "I made it. I want to feel your strength. I want to know your story." Because we're not alone in this. We never were. There are thousands of us, millions maybe, learning to love ourselves after someone else failed to. Years have passed since that night in Gyeongju, since that terrible wedding night that changed everything. Years since I saw the man who swore to love me holding another woman's hand, laughing with her while I waited alone. Years since I found the letter hidden in the poetry book, since I read words that shattered my world. Years since I gathered the courage to pack my bags and leave that house, to leave that life, to rebuild myself from nothing. And you know what happened to him? I found out by chance, through a mutual acquaintance who didn't know it was a sensitive subject, that he married Hee-jin eventually, the woman in red, the woman he chose over me. They said it was a small ceremony, quiet and discreet, without the weight of traditions that had marked our elaborate wedding, just family and close friends, simple. And when I heard that news, I waited to feel something, waited for the anger to rise, for the pain to return, for the jealousy to claw at my insides, but I felt nothing, just a soft indifference, almost comforting in its completeness, because he didn't matter anymore. He was just someone I used to know, someone from another life, another version of myself that no longer existed. Today, when I remember that night, the promise of 5 minutes and the sound of laughter upstairs, the red dress and the betrayal, I don't feel hate anymore. I feel pity. Because whoever betrays love, betrays themselves first. Whoever lies to the person sleeping beside them, first lies to their own soul, corrupts their own integrity. And that's a debt that no new marriage can pay, no fresh start can erase. He will live with his choices, with the person he chose to be, and I live with mine. And mine, my choices brought me here, to a life that's small by some measures, but true. authentic, real, to an apartment that's simple and tiny, but mine, to a solitude that doesn't frighten me, doesn't feel like loneliness, but liberates me and gives me space to breathe and grow. In Korea, I learned that even the coldest winter holds a spring within it, waiting, that the frozen earth is just resting, gathering strength for rebirth, and it was in that spring, metaphorical and real, that I was reborn. Today, when I walk through the streets of Seoul in any season, when I feel the cold November wind on my face or the warm spring breeze or the humid summer air, I smile. I see couples holding hands and don't feel longing or loss. I see brides in white dresses taking photos and don't feel pain or regret or that ache of what might have been. Because I learned something no one had ever taught me, something I had to discover on my own through pain and loss and rebuilding. The most important love isn't the one you receive from someone else. It's the one you give yourself. It's the choice you make every single day to value yourself, to respect yourself, to choose yourself. He left me on our wedding night, abandoned me in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, is that in that very instant, in that moment of abandonment and betrayal, I began to find myself, to discover who I really was beneath all the expectations and conditioning and masks. Losing someone is sad, but losing yourself is devastating. And I almost lost myself, almost. But I didn't. I survived. I rebuilt. I became. Today, when the wind blows through the streets of Seoul carrying the scents of street food and flowers and city life, I close my eyes and think with absolute sincerity, thank you for leaving. Thank you for showing me who you really were. Thank you for breaking my heart. Because if he had stayed, if he had been a better liar, a more careful cheater, I never would have learned to stay with myself, to be my own companion. If he had loved me the way I deserved, I never would have discovered that the greatest love of all, the most reliable and constant love, begins from within. If he hadn't broken me so completely, I never would have learned to rebuild myself, never would have discovered my own strength. And today, I'm made entirely of pieces I put together myself with my own hands, pieces I chose, pieces I shaped. And these pieces, this mosaic of survival and growth, are stronger than I ever was when I was whole and unbroken in someone else's hands. Today, I choose myself. Every single day, in every small decision and every big one, I choose myself first. And that is the greatest proof of love I could ever give or receive. If this story touched you in any way, if it resonated with something in your own experience, leave a heart in the comments and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Because maybe she's also pretending to be okay right now. Maybe she's also smiling while dying inside. Maybe she also needs to know that it's possible to start over, to rebuild, to survive, and even to thrive. That it's possible not just to survive the ending of love, but to flourish in its aftermath. And remember, please remember this. You are enough, exactly as you are right now in this moment. You always have been enough. You always will be.